This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the learning of Torah Hashem, Be'ezus Hashem Yisbach. This is a very special shir being broadcasted from Deerfield Beach, Florida. And it is also being shown through the benevolence of TorahAnytime.com, and I thank Moshe Sofer, who had a very busy week. He just came off the runway yesterday, who took out of his busy schedule to bring the equipment and to show it. So we learn, as always, with the tefillah, that all those that have been touched by the dread machla, known as Yana Machla, all the related diseases, should have a refuah shalem of Yisrael. All of us and our loved ones should always be healthy. Those that are looking for their shidduch should find their shidduch quickly and easily. Those that are awaiting children should be blessed with zarachai v'kayama. We should have parnasa berevach uv'chavayd and lange gesundtes Yisrael shalom bayis. The share is dedicated, Lili Nishmas, my dear Rebbetzin, Miriam Liba Basir Baron. She should have a lichtige Gan Eden, Melitzis Yosha, for all those that she loved. And so I shouldn't forget, from the Gitko, I want to invite all my dear Talmidim, friends, and everybody listening, whether on the Kol Lashon Network, on TorahAnytime.com, on Facebook. There will be a shloshim, it's already shloshim, this Sunday night, January 21st, in the main shul of the Young Israel of Staten Island, from 8 to 10 p.m. Featured speakers include Be'ezus Hashem Rabbi Newman, who was our shotgun together with his wife, Rebbetzin Yehudis, Bungalow Kalmi, neighbor, Emir Hashem, and hopefully Rabbi Mintz will be speaking, and we have other featured speakers. My children will speak, myself as well. And I'll be from 8 to 10 this Sunday night. It's on Forest Hill Road in Staten Island. Just look up the Young Israel of Staten Island. And I hope you could come and be inspired. I would also like to learn for Avram Yudel ben Esther that he should have a refuah shalema Yisrael. Parshas Bay is one of the more famous parshas, and the drama of Yetzias Mitzrayim occurs in this week's parsha, the Yom Tov of Pesach, the final Makos. There's plenty to talk about. I'm going to speak about something that I don't think I ever spoke about in this year. It's a Gemara in Zvachim. It says, "Vayetze miyam Paro b'choriaf," that Moshe left Paro in a rage of anger. So the Gemara says in Masechta Zvachim on Daf Kuf Beis that Amar Reish Lakish tells us, Satra, he smacked him. Amazing thing. Those days, monarchy, you don't fool around with monarchy, especially with those monarchs that thought that they were divine. Paro was one of those that believed that he was a deity. It says, Li Ori. We know that he says, the Nile is mine. They worship the Nile. And he said, Li Ori, the Nile is mine. And we know that Paro claimed that he didn't have to go to the bathroom. Every morning he went to merge with the Nile, and that's when he went to the bathroom. That's what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, go and meet him in the morning. Paro yoytze amoima. So literally mean he was going down to the water, but Rashi tells us he's going to take care of his needs, so hold him there, and he's going to be hopping around. He didn't go for 24 hours, so they ask a question that this slapping of Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't seem to be consistent with what Moshe Rabbeinu said right nearby. It says, "V'yordu chol avodecha eilei elai," and all your servants will come down to me. And Rashi says that he was giving kavod lamalchus. He was giving honor to the throne. He was giving honor to the crown. And it doesn't seem to be consistent with the way Moshe Rabbeinu was acting with Paro to slap him. So it's interesting, the Be'er HaShabbos, and you remember the Be'er HaShabbos, I told a remarkable story how that Sefer came to my hand. He brings down that the Sefer HaParshios asks the question. The Sefer HaParshios is a beautiful set of Svarim on Kol HaTorah Kula. It's not used as much as it should be, I believe. But the Sefer HaParshios asks this question, and he adds to the question, and he says, remember, Paro raised Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu was the paragon of a curse HaTayv. It was Paro's daughter that saved him, and he was raised, till he was 22 in the house of Paro, and it doesn't seem, therefore, to be in the way of gratitude to slap Paro in the face. So the Sefer HaParshios says it's even more puzzling. And he gives a fascinating answer. He says, to the contrary, Moshe Rabbeinu slapped him in front of all the palace guards and in front of all of his servants and all of his ministers to embarrass him. And it says, Amal b'pnei chaver b'rabim, it's kilu shefer damim. So that it was like he killed him, and that saved Paro from being killed at Makas B'cheres. Like we know that it says that Paro survived. Indeed, the Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer says that he went on to become the king of Nineveh that we read about in Yonah. He had enjoyed tremendous longevity. And when we say in Ezra's, in Shachris in the morning, and we said, Echad mehem loy noisar, that not one of them survived, so the people in the know say that we have to read it, Echad mehem loy. One of them did not die. No, sir. He survived. And that was Paro. Paro did not die. But the question is, why did he die? He was a Bechar. So the answer is that Moshe Rabbeinu preempted it. He preempted it by slapping him in public. Thereby the blood drained from his face from the embarrassment. It was as if he was Shayfet Daman. Therefore it was as if he was dead already. And therefore he was saved from Makas B'cheres. You have to know that although Rashi says, V'yardu chalavedecha elai elai, and all your servants would come down to me, is he was giving kavod l'malchus, I always felt that Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to scare Paro into action. And if you look at what Moshe Rabbeinu told him, there are many indications that he was trying to get Paro to send us out before Makas B'cheres. He did many things that implied that Paro would die. One of them is by saying, V'yordu chalavedecha elai elai. After Makas B'cheres, all your servants will come down. What about him? you won't be around. You're a Bechar. And he said to him, Ulechol Elohei Mitzrayim es Shvatim ani Hashem. Against all the gods of Egypt, I will punish. And Paro was a god. Li'ayri. Then he told him, Kain dibarta. You're right. Lo yosef oid ra'is panecha. You won't see me again. Oh, that's pretty scary. Sounds like Paro won't be around to tell him to leave. So there were many indications that Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to scare him. And here's one more. If you look, it says, Mibechor Paro hayoyshev al kisai ad bechor hashvi. From Bechor Paro. Now, Bechor Paro could be translated in one of two ways. Paro's firstborn, or Mibechor Paro, Paro, who is the firstborn. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to scare him. But he also did something because of his gratitude to Paro. After all, he grew up in Paro. Paro's daughter saved his life. He did something that Paro should not die, and the Medrash says Paro did not die because he went on to report and tell of the miracle of 9 million Egyptians drowning in the Yam Suf in either 4 or 3 hours. But there is another lesson over here, incidentally, which is very important. And that lesson is that sometimes in life you might suffer terrible embarrassment. Terrible embarrassment. Somebody embarrasses you in front of your wife, in front of your husband, in front of your children. You might suffer terrible embarrassment. You should know that maybe Hashem did that you shouldn't get into a car accident. maybe Hashem did that to save your life. And by extension, we could say that this applies. It says that 4 people are considered like dead, right? And one of them is somebody that doesn't have children. And sometimes people can't understand why don't we have children? And sometimes that's instead of one of the spouses dying. It could be true of impoverishment also, because ani chashuv kamei, somebody loses their job and they're going through a difficult time. And one of the reasons why an ani is chashuv kamei is because just like a dead person doesn't have any friends anymore, poor people lose their friends very quickly. All of a sudden nobody wants to have anything to do with them. They want their money, they want favors, right? So, but sometimes Hashem does that instead of the person leaving this world. It's a very important lesson to know. While we're on this discussion, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvaro. While we're on this discussion, there's a Ramah in Shulchan Aruch that the inyan of fasting Erev Yom Kippur is only for firstborn boys. That's a Ramah in Shulchan Aruch. And there's a famous Shitas Aguda that argues, we don't practice it, but it argues that firstborn girls also have to. And it's based on the Medrash that says that Basia, better known as Basia, but in Divrei Hayamim her name was pronounced Basia. Basius was a firstborn, and she should have died. But she didn't die because she had a praklit toiv. That's what the Medrash in Shmais Rabbah says. The Medrash in Shmais Rabbah says that she had a praklit toiv, a good protector, namely Moshe Rabbeinu, whose life she saved. So the Agudah says that since we see that Basia was spared, that means the other firstborn girls did die. So that firstborn girl should fast as well. That's the Shitas Agudah. We don't hold that way, and the Gra says it's because we don't find that the Torah gave Kedushas Bechar to the Nekeva, right? We know that since the Bechar was passed over, the firstborn got Kedusha. Later on, that Kedusha was given to the Leviah, but we don't find that Kedusha was given to the girls that were firstborns. It was only given to the boys. But the bottom line is that we find that Basia was saved. She was supposed to die because she was a firstborn. Question is, but what do you mean? We know that Basia converted, right? That was the whole story about Tered Bas Paro Lirchitz Al Yar, that she went down to bathe by the Yar. She went down to be Toivel from Gilulei Beis Aviyah. She went down to immerse from her father's idol. She was a Jew. So what do you mean she was supposed to die? So again, the Ber HaShabbos, he answers. It's a fascinating thing. He says that although the Hashem, like we learn in the Haggadah, Lo Yal Yedei Malach, V'Lo Yal Yedei Saraf, it wasn't done through a Malach, it wasn't done through a fire angel, it wasn't done through a Shliach, it was done by HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kvaydoi v'atzmai. But it also says that Hashem sent the mashchis, right? And that's why we put the dam on our door, v'lo yitein hamashchis lovay es bateichem lingayv, that the mashchis, the destroyer, shouldn't come to the house to smite. Now, why we need both the destroyer and Hashem on the same night, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But besides Hashem being out there, the destroyer was out there. And it says, Kevan shenitein reshus l'mashchis lovay, Once a destroyer is given permission, it doesn't distinguish between good and bad. That's why it says, that nobody was told to leave their house in the night. They weren't allowed to leave their house. So Basia was still in the palace. So she was outside. So she was targeted by the mashkitz, which doesn't distinguish between good and evil. And therefore, because of that, she needed the praklativ of Moshe Rabbeinu. Just as an aside, in Masechta Sofrim, where it talks in Masechta Sofrim about, and if you want to have an address for this, it's Masechta Sofrim Chof Aleph Gimel. It's one of those small Masechtas that not many people learn. But in Masechta Sofrim, it gives another reason for fasting Erev Pesach. Vatznuim, those that are modest, that really means those that are pious. B'shvil hamatzah k'dei sheyichnasu lotav. They fast in order they should have a great desire for the matzah. It's interesting that I met a few people who fast and they don't go to a siyum. And I always thought that it's because they felt that the siyum was a loophole, But it might be that they have a tradition in the family, this other, and by the way, realize that this other opinion is not just restricted to firstborns. It's anybody. It's not restricted to men, because the women have a mitzvah of matzah just like the men. Right? There were some people that fasted simply to have a big te'avain, to eat with a real hunger the matzah. So we see the reward of having a praklativ, a strong defense. When a person is in trouble, they need a strong defender. Right? She had a strong defender. She had Moshe Rabbeinu. So I'll tell you an interesting story. Story, what happened to Rav Shmuel Shulzinger. When Rav Shmuel Shulzinger was a young boy, he contracted typhus. And his temperature was, now I'm not good, although, it's interesting. A lot of times in the hospital, the thermometers come out on Celsius. And I noticed that in the hospital, the nurses themselves, they Googled quickly to find out how to convert the Celsius to Fahrenheit. So anyway, it says that his temperature when he had typhus was 41 degrees Celsius. So I Googled it. That's 105.8 Fahrenheit. That's what his temperature stayed that way. And his health he was tottering on death's door. And his mother would sit by the bed with a Theal, but she would keep by her the Sfas Emes. Because her father, every Friday night, he would learn the Sfas Emes on the entire parsha. It's about 30 pages on the entire parsha that the Sfas Emes said from Tuf Reish Lamed to Tuf Reish Samachay. That's 36 years of his thoughts on the parsha. And he would learn that, and it's coming up. The Sfas Emes is Yortzeit. Wednesday is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So, let's see, Thursday is 2, Friday is 3, Shabbos is 4. This Sunday is the Sfas Emes' Yortzeit. So, on the Yortzeit, her father would gather people in the Shtibel and Ger, and he would tell over from the Sfas Emes. So she would hold the Sfas Emes by the bed. One night, the father, this was the mother, the father had a dream that the Sfas Emes came to him in a dream and said, Hayeled Yavri, the child will get better. And that's what happened. So the child had a praklativ. You have to have a praklativ. Tell you, when thinking of my Rebbetzin, I feel that she was a tremendous protector of the family, protector of her community. Staten Island. There's a Gemara in Tanis. The Gemara tells us, I think it was the city of Droikreis. City of Droikreis, it's in the third parak of Tanis. The city of Droikreis was attacked by the plague. In a certain neighborhood, there was no plague. And they thought it was because of a tzaddik that lived in the neighborhood. And the Gemara says, that's too small for the tzaddik. It says that there was a person there in the neighborhood that used to lend out a hoe. He had his own hoe. It was an expensive item. He used to lend it out for anybody who needed it for a burial. And in that schus, the city was protected from plague. That's a praklit toiv. I remember how my wife would go out when there was a graveside levaya. You know, graveside levaya is never somebody that doesn't have a lot of friends, and they didn't feel, either they couldn't afford or they felt it would be embarrassment to rent out a chapel. There'll be so few people there. So they make a graveside funeral. My wife specialized in going to graveside funerals. Usually those were very cold because it was outside and somebody spoke and you were shivering outside. There was hardly anybody there. And it took a very long time because there wasn't even a minyan a lot of times. And it took a long time to do the burial. And my wife specialized in that because she felt there's hardly anybody there for the family and there's nobody there to give kavod. And you know what a protection that was for the town? What a praklit taiv. It's important for us to know that when we do something like this, it's a praklit. It's a defense. There was a Gemara, in that same Gemara, it says that I believe that there was a city that was saved from fire. And they thought that it was because of a chashuv rav that lived there. And he said, no, that's too small for him. It was because of a woman who used to lend out her oven for people that didn't have timber and couldn't warm up their chalas, so she would lend out her oven for those people. And I think about how my wife used to lend out, we had in the country, besides her famous mitzvah wagon, which she gave everybody to use for their garbage, but she had also a hand truck. What did we need a hand truck for? But she bought the hand truck because she said, Moshe, a lot of people load on Friday stuff that they brought from the bungalow and they're carrying boxes. And she used to always see somebody pull up and say, take the hand truck, take the shopping cart. You know, these are things that protect the bungalow colony. They protect the shtat. I was thinking about praklit and walking down memory lane. It reminds me of something else. That when our Chani was in the hospital 28 years ago, it's now 27 years ago, close to 28 years ago, suffering, you know, we heard about the romaine lettuce scare, suffering from an E. coli infection that caused hemolytic uremic syndrome, and we were there in Columbia Presbyterian for 5.5 weeks. My wife and I stayed with her there. But I traveled every night from Columbia Presbyterian to Borough Park to give my daf yomi, and came back to all the way back to Columbia Presbyterian, all the way back, all the way up the FDR. Sometimes in traffic, it was an hour and 20-minute drive, and I was, of course, wiped out from a whole day in the hospital. And we said that in the schus of daf yomi, she would get better. And she did. After 5.5 weeks, the virus went away, infection went away, and a year later we made a Sudas Haidah, and I said, you know, everybody likes a good gematria. What's the gematria of Chana Weiss? And it stunned me. The gematria of Chana Weiss we spell with 2 vavs, is exactly 156, the gematria of Daf HaYomi. That's a praklit tov. You have to have a praklit tov in life. Now, I mentioned, you know, when we're talking about Basia, so I mentioned the fact that the mashchis came. So there's a question: why do you need a mashchus for? If it says that the firstborns were killed by Hashem, lo yadei malach, lo yadei sarif, lo yadei shliach, ala kadosh baruch hu b'kvoda ba'atzmai. So then, why did you need a mashchus? So the Gaon, Zecher Tzadik Livracha Schusi Yogan Aleinu, the Gra, answers that V'lo Yavai HaMashchus meant that on the night of Makas B'chayris, even a Yid whose kates came and was supposed to die that night, didn't die. Even a Yid whose kates came and was supposed to die that night, didn't die, so that it shouldn't be said that a Yid died on the night of Makas B'chayris. So that's V'lo Yavai HaMashchus. But I believe others say that the reason why the mashchus came is if a house didn't have a firstborn, then the gadol shebabayis died. And the gadol shebabayis, the oldest in the house, he was not killed by Hashem. He was killed by the mashchus. It's interesting that I thought of another teretz why Basia was supposed to die even though she converted. Because Hashem said, Mi b'chor para. And she was the Bechor Para. She was from his main wife, as it's brought down in the Medrash. She was the Bechor Para. But she didn't die because she had the Prakla Toiv. She didn't die because she had that good defender in Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, I want to tell you a Medrash by Makas Chayshech. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Nitei yodcha al hashemayim, stretch your hand on the heavens. V'hi chayshech al adam al eretz Mitzrayim. There'll be darkness. V'yom ish chayshech. You'll feel the darkness. There'll be a darkness. You'll feel the darkness. So the Medrash cites a pasuk in Theal. The pasuk in Tehillim, referring to the plague of darkness, says as follows: Shlach chayshech. He sent darkness, v'yachshich, and it became dark, v'loy moru es devarai, and they didn't rebel against his word. Now, what does that mean? Who didn't rebel? The Egyptians? They couldn't move. What do you mean they didn't rebel? Who didn't rebel? So the Chassam Sofer says a beautiful thing. And we've talked about this in the past. Imagine if Jews in Auschwitz would have that Hashem sent against the Nazis that were guarding the camp a darkness that they couldn't move. Here the tormentors that gassed their wives and their children, their fathers and their brothers, are now frozen to the spot for 3 days. You don't think that they would chop their heads off? You don't think that they would mutilate them? People that gas 12,000 Jews every day. Here there was a Makis Choshech, and the Jews could have killed, these are the people that Paro shechted 150 babies in the morning for their blood, and they have 150 babies in the evening to bathe when he had tzaras. This is the man who put the babies into the walls of Pithom and Ramses when they were short one brick from the quota of 600. And yet, all the Jews did is they looked at the wealth, what was there. And not only that, 3 days darkness, they could have left Egypt. They could have packed out. No. Says Chassam Sofer, Stargim Yonasim and Theal, Yosef put them to an oath, Vayashpe, Yosef es b'nei Yisrael, and Vaimer, he said, Poka yifkoid eschem, Hashem will remember you. Until then, you can't leave. He put them to an oath. So they listened to the oath. They could have looted. You remember in Manhattan when they had the blackout? You remember the looting? They could have looted. I mean, after all, they worked for these enslaved labor. They could have looted the houses. They didn't touch anything. They just looked what was there. So v'loy moru es devarai. They didn't rebel. It could be, I wanted to taina. Remember we asked why were Dasan and Aviram why didn't they die? It said 4/5 of Klal Yisrael died in the plague of darkness. Why didn't they die? So the Rosh says, because the people that died were the people that didn't want to leave. They already had money by the Makav Dam. They didn't want to leave. Now what happened to the Egyptians? Did 210 years in Egypt, and they wanted to stay. Hashem says, you want to stay? You don't believe in Pakad Yifkai? You'll stay. You'll be buried there. And we know that. We know that that's what Hashem. That's the Rosh's approach. But I want to learn a different approach. It could be that there were Jews that wanted to loot. That's the natural thing. It could be that Jews that tried to kill the Egyptians. Hashem said, no, Moshe Rabbeinu just said that you should look for their wealth. You shouldn't do anything else. They disobeyed, they died. But you see the greatness of Klal Yisrael. Those that stayed were people that were sterling. And I think I'm going to segue over here into a kasha that bothered me for many years. And once again, I found the question in my wonderful Sefer Ber HaShabbos. This question bothered me a lot. Maybe it bothered you too. I'm sure it bothered you. You know, it says that we were naked and barren. And in order to get out of Egypt, we needed two mitzvahs, right? I saw you wallowing in the blood. With the blood you will live, your blood will live. That's the two mitzvahs of the Dam Pesach, that we slaughtered the Egyptian god, the sheep god, and the Dam Milah, and no matter how old we are, we mouthed ourselves. Great, gewaldig. But how can you say that we were barren? It says, it's a medrash, that we were saved because we had four things. So first is famous, the three things that we didn't change: our names, our language, and our clothing, right? And that's the famous Sfas Emes Chidush Harim. That's the reason why Minhagim are so big on Pesach, right? Mishnish, right? Because on Pesach we were saved because of Minhagim, not changing our names, our clothing, and our language of Minhagim, right? But it also is brought down that two other things: that there were no Dalei Torim, that we didn't slander people, and we were Gedurim Baroyas. We didn't have immorality, except for the one case of that one woman, right? Shalamis Bas Divrei. There was no case, even though the women could have got their attackers, their captors, to go easy on them if they traded favors. They didn't have one episode of immorality, right? So, what are you saying that we were Aram area? I mean, we have all these merits. You know, we kept in the tropical climate of Egypt. We kept modest clothing. I mean, we didn't mess with our captors. We didn't speak bad about each other. That's very admirable. How can you say we were Aram area? It's always bothered me, this question. The Ber HaShabbos gives a myriadic answer. He says that for protection, Sheva al Tasa, just not sinning is not enough. There's a Gemara in Soita on Daf Chaf Aleph. Gemara in Soita says, Mitzvah be'idna da'osik ba magino matzah. A mitzvah, at the time that you're doing it, protects and saves. But it has to be at the time that you're doing it. It has to be doing. It has to be a kum v'aseh. Therefore, we had to do two mitzvahs, Pesach and Milah, which are things that we do, slaughtering the Egypt god, showing that we're breaking away, and risking our lives by putting it out, and roasting it, that the smell should go out. We can't camouflage it, right? And circumcising ourselves. And then it protected us. I always wanted to maintain, why do we need two? Would be enough one. That's why the Milah was not for Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Milah was the schus we needed for Kriyas Yamsuf. That's why we don't talk about the Milah in the Haggadah night. Right? We don't talk about that. Because the Milah was the Korban Pesach. That's what all of Pesach. The Milah was not for that, even though it took place on that night. But that was for Kriyas Yamsuf. And Raya is, it says L'Geizer Yamsuf L'Gezarim. He cut the Yamsuf L'Gezarim for those that cut themselves. And that was the schus, but you needed a kumva say. So you have to know, it's not enough that I don't do things. I have to do things. Something like chesed, that's limud Torah. Limud Torah is even more. Limud Torah is the highest madrag. It protects even when we're not learning. Even bidna delay asikba. But there you do something nice for your wife, for your husband, spend time with your children, do kibbut of aim, do b'kechaylim, so you're doing something. So they needed to do something, a very big, important lesson. Although I told you once, and it's worthwhile repeating, this is always worthwhile repeating, that in Judaism, we get a lot of reward for that which we could have done and didn't do. The best example of this is the famous vart of the Gaon. The Gaon says that one of the greatest pleasures ever possible, one of the greatest pleasures that exists, is the Oragonas, the hidden light. It says that that's the one thing that Hashem saw in Bria Sa'olam. It says, so if he saw it was good, why did he separate it? So it's too good for the wicked, so he put it away for the future. Riviera is not too good for the wicked. A beautiful woman is not too good for the wicked. Right? The most delicious wine is not too good for the wicked. But the Oragonas is. The guide says, what do we have to do to merit the Oragonas? It's fascinating. It's something that we don't do. He says, for every moment that you could say Lashon Hara, I got to tell you this gossip. You hold back, you're Zeicha to the Aragonas. So you see, for not doing things, you're Zeicha to a lot of things. Zeicha to a lot of things. And I always like to say the case of Chana. The Ben Ish Chai Pshat, and there's other people that say the same Pshat, that it says that Chana told Hashem, give me a child. If you don't give me a child, I'll kaviyachol twist your arm, kaviyachol. I'll make my husband Elkanah jealous, and he'll warn me not to be with that man, and then I'll be with that man in room 208 of the Holiday Inn. Of course, I won't sin with him. So he'll give me the drink of the Saita, and it says by the drink of the Saita, if she didn't commit adultery, v'niksav in Israel Zara, she'll conceive and have child. And you won't be able to make your Torah plaster, you won't be able to make your Torah false, so you'll have to give me a child. So why put me through the hoops? So give me a child now. So everybody asked the kasha, but I don't understand. Well, that's a mitzvah baver, because she wants a child, she's going to threaten Hashem, that she's going to be over the Issa Yichud with this man, and she's going to pain her husband by making him jealous. I mean, does that make sense? So Ben Ish Chai says, Chash b'Shalom, Chana wasn't saying that she was going to do it. She wasn't threatening she was going to do it. She was saying, Hashem, if you look for my skusim, if I have enough to have a child, good. If I don't have enough, I'll give you another skus, that I could have done this and I won't. So here again, you see an example, we get credit for what we don't do. But, as the Be'er HaShabbos says, it's not as enough of a protection as a kumva sake, to be protected when they were in the 49th degree of Tumah, to be protected from the dangers of Egypt, they needed an active mitzvah. So the more active mitzvahs that we do, the more protected that we are. For another, we think, and we have the right to think it, but we think that since we have Pesach all the time, and we have the Makkos, I know everything about the Makkos. I bet you can't tell me one thing that I don't know about the Makkos. I mean, I have 50 Agadas in my house. I've heard it all. Let me tell you something, a medrash, that you might not have heard. We know that there was a time that during the Makkah of Choshech, they were frozen. The last 3 days in the Makkah of Choshech, they couldn't move. They were frozen to their spot. Medrash says, you know why that happened. It was Midah Keneged Midah, because when the Egyptians ate, they had a Jew stand next to them and put a candle on their head. And they had to stand perfectly still, balancing the candle on their head. And they said that if they moved and the candle fell, they cut off their head. That was one of the tortures they did. This is, for us, it's reminiscent of how the Nazis used to sport with the Jews and do all kinds of crazy things with the Jews. Right? And this is one of them. This is a forerunner of the Nazis. They would make them stand perfectly still with a candle balanced on their head, and if they moved and the candle fell, they cut off their head. So Midah Keneged Midah, they were frozen to their spot for 3 days. It's an insight, and it explains why you see a funny lashon that it says when Hashem punished them, he said, Es asher hisalalti b'Mitzrayim, how I mocked the Egyptians. And it sounds funny, Hashem mocked the Egyptians. Because that's Midah Keneged Midah. They were mocking us. They were playing sport with us in the most cruel and sadistic ways. It's an insight into the saga of Egypt and how it was a forerunner of what the Nazis did to us and to the Jews. One of the mitzvahs in this week's parsha is the mitzvah of tefillin. And of course, since we do it all the time, it's an important mitzvah. Any extra kavanah that we could get in this mitzvah, we could apply to our lives. So it says, "V'haya la'os al yodka." It should be a sign on your yodka, which means yad keya, on your weak hand. U'letaytafos beinenecha, frontlets, the area opposite between your eyes, ki b'chayzik yad, with a strong hand, ha'itzianu Hashem b'Mitzrayim. And we know that we learn out from Yod Ka, that Yod Keya, that it's the tefillin is put on the left hand. Now this poses a puzzle. After all, we know that we do mitzvahs with the right hand. We always try to do mitzvahs with the right hand. This famous story that I say over all the time from Rav Yaakov's biography of Rav Yaakov, one of the finest biographies ever written, that when he was ill in the hospital and a nurse saw him struggling to lift a cup with his right hand, which was burdened with all kinds of IVs, she said, "Rabbi, why don't you take the cup in your left hand? It's unencumbered." So he said, "I'm going to make a blessing, and I make a blessing with the right hand." Right? That's why I tell people a lot of times, you pick up the bottle of Poland Spring with your right hand, and you pour it into the cup in the left hand. You pick up the bottle with the right hand. The bottle's heavy. So a lot of times the cup is in your left hand. You have to mentally think to switch the cup to your right hand to make the blessing. In the morning, when you pick up the cup for Negelwasser, so it's interesting, you got to wash the right hand first, but it's brought down that you should start the mitzvah with the right hand. So you're supposed to pick the cup up with your right hand, pass it to the left, and then wash the right hand first. That's the proper way to do Negelwasser. So it's interesting that some say, so why is the tefillin with the left hand? So some say, well, it's simple, because the mitzvah is the kshira. So in order to fulfill ukshartam with the right hand, you have to put it on the left. So that's the simple. Others say, and it's a mistake, but others say that since the tefillin is supposed to be keneged alev, like we say in what we say before we put on the tefillin, it should be keneged alev, right, to subjugate the thoughts of our heart, our emotions, our feelings, that they should be proper emotions. There shouldn't be emotions of anger and hatred. There shouldn't be emotions of grudges and vengeance, right? And since, if anybody knows anatomy, the heart tilts to the left side. The heart is slightly left of the breastbone. So that would be a tzvara, that why it's on the left side, because it's supposed to be keneged alev. The problem is that a lefty puts it on the right side. and a lefty side is also on the left side. Right? So that doesn't explain. Right? That's why it's not such a good answer. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh asks the Kasha. And Orach Chaim HaKadosh gives an important answer. It's an answer that we have to keep with us in life. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that Hashem wants us to remember that even when we're feeling weak, even when things are not going good, we still have to obey Him and still have to keep the Torah. And that's why it's so important. It's such an important lesson that's why we put it on the left hand. Even when we are weak moments, we're going through a time of turmoil, we lost our job, we're having problems with a child, somebody passes away, we still have to keep Hashem's Torah. It's what an important lesson. And then I took the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, it's no Chiddush, it's obviously what the Orach Chaim HaKadosh means, but I took the Orach Chaim HaKadosh and then implanted into the rest of the pasuk. It says, "V'hoya la'is al yodcha on your weak hand, u'taytafes beinenecha, ki b'chayzik yoda yitzianu Hashem b'Mitzrayim." Because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim with a strong hand. In other words, we employed this when we were in Egypt in the 49th degree of Tumah, at our weakest moment, when we were at our weakest moment of Ruchnius. We still employed it, so we have to remember to do this. Remember, I told you that my father had a Spinka Haggadah. He once helped a Spinka descendant. He was given a personal Haggadah. I yashined it for my father. And in there he says, why do we have to remember Egypt? We remember Egypt every 12 hours of our life. It's amazing. The Egyptian connection. A Jew can't go. We have to remember it in the morning and in the night. In the third parasha of Kriya Shema, it's a mitzvah every 12 hours of our life to remember Egypt. He said, what's so important about Egypt? I mean, you'll say without Egypt we wouldn't be a Jewish people. Yeah, without Mordechai and Esther we wouldn't be a Jewish people. We don't remember it every 12 hours. And without being saved from Sancheriv at the time of Chizkiyahu, we wouldn't have been saved either. But we don't mention that at all. And Chanukah is only 8 days. So what's happens every 12 hours? Speaker Rebbe says that we were at the 49th degree of Tumah. If we were stayed another second, we wouldn't have been worthy to be redeemed. 50 days later, we were worthy to see Hashem on Sinai. That's how fast a person could turn around their life. That lesson has to be reviewed every 12 hours of life. What an important lesson. That lesson has to be reviewed every 12 hours of life. There's a famous vort, which I've said in this shir many times before, but I want to mention it again anyway. It says, that when the Egyptians were stricken with blackness, it was so dark that a man couldn't see his brother, and no man was able to get up from his place for 3 days. So says the Bali Musa, if loyro ish, if a person does not see his brother, he only sees his own needs. Sisters don't see each other's needs. Brothers don't see each other's needs. And a person doesn't get up to help his friend, then that's a life of darkness. That's a very dark world. There are people that live the American life of me, myself, and I. And they don't see, they have sisters and brothers struggling. Listen, I have my own problems. They don't get up and do for others. They're always driving on the highway. They're never stopping for people in trouble. They're never helping those that they know that don't have shidduchim or that are out of work. They live on their own, in their own bubble. That's a life of darkness. When I think about my Rebbetzin, everybody says that she was full of light. She was a beacon. She was a ray of sunshine. Because she lived for her family. Oh, did she live for her sisters? And she always got up to do. She was a doer. Somebody needed a sheitel, she got them a sheitel. Somebody was lonely, she kept them company. Somebody was afraid, she told them not to worry. That's what she did. And other Bali Musar add another element. And they say that if loy ro ishes achiv, then loy kamu ish mitachtav, a person doesn't elevate themselves from their place. They are given a certain place, and our job is to climb, it's to steig, like Yaakov Avinu's ladder, to climb. A person does not see someone else. The Olam Chesed Yibana, this world was created for kindness. A person that doesn't see someone else, then loy kamu ish mitachtav. They don't get up from their place. I want to again, it's amazing that this year wouldn't have been able to happen if not for Moshe Sefer taking out the time, downloading it, getting the equipment, coming in his busy schedule all the way here to Rabbi Lando, he doesn't live right here, and setting it up. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to all of you that come to watch a film. It's always better to have the rabbi in. But you know, my record is pretty good for this year. Even through my wife's long illness, I come out never missed this year. Also, I want to remind you that if you'd like to sponsor a share, it's heard literally throughout the world, in 130 countries. It's viewed, it's heard on Kol Lashon, eventually on Dial-A-Share, and of course it goes to my many subscribers who support me. If you want to sponsor a share, 718-916-3100, it's $360. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Also, we will be finishing Orchis Chaim L'Harosh. I think the next share is the last year, about 150 shiurim. There are 2 sponsorship opportunities for this. They're both going to be dedicated, firstly, to my Rebbetzin and anybody else that you want to dedicate it to. One sponsorship is going to be, I'm going to make an MP3 set to market and to send out of the entire Chaim L'Rosh, so we need sponsors for that project. And the second is that we're probably going to be learning next the Sefer Tomer Devora, which, by the way, is brought down as a protection against Yana Machla. That's probably the next Sefer, and we have one sponsor for that already, but we're looking for more sponsors. Please let me know, because that project is probably going to start in a few weeks. I have to work on it first, but it's going to start in a few weeks. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. And once again, I want to remind you that this year, not this year, of course I'll be back for next week in person, Be'ezus Hashem. Hashem should give me a safe flight to come back to you. But it's the Shloshim, which I hope to be by as well. The Shloshim will be this Sunday from 8 to 10 p.m., men and women, boys and girls, an evening of inspiration, of wonderful speakers, to really inspire people from the remarkable, amazing, special, loving, warm life of my Rebbetzin, Miriam Liba Bas Reb Aaron. That will be from 8 to 10 p.m. at the Young Israel of Staten Island this Sunday night. Please come. I want it to be a lot of people and covered for my Rebbetzin. I want it to be a standing room only crowd. Please come. You can look it up. It's on Forest Hill Road on Staten Island in the main shul of the Young Israel. Once again, I thank the Young Israel for making the shul possible. Thank you very much for joining us. Reb Chananya ben Akasha Amar, Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos es Yisrael lefikach hir b'lem Torah mitzvahs, shenemar inoi chafetz l'man tzidkoi yagdul Torah v'yadir.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.